Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. My name is Mike Fielding. The aim of this video is to demystify and explain the science behind mindfulness and meditation and explain to you why certain ancient practices such as calligraphy health, what I practice, which is a blend of qigong, tai chi, yoga and ancient Taoist martial arts and philosophy, can be so profoundly beneficial for your long-term health as it has been for mine. So I want to give you a bit of an example of how it's actually helped me by telling you my story, and then, as I say, going on to demystify and explain the science behind that. Okay, so a bit of background about me. Now, I'm a physiotherapist and I have been for 24 years. I'm also a movement re-education specialist. So I teach a modified form of Pilates, okay, to other health practitioners, such as physios, chiros, osteos, doctors, nurses, so that they can then teach Pilates to their clients. And I also teach, obviously, Pilates to my clients to help them move better and have better movement patterns. Now, I've always had an interest in mindfulness and meditation, but where this really compounded itself and really started to come into play in a lot bigger way was when I became injured in September 2018. Now, I suffered a spinal cord injury, a freak spinal cord injury, because I had a nitrogen bubble lodged on my spinal cord after a scuba diving incident. We don't know exactly why it happened. However, the result was that I was paralysed from the ribcage down. Now, what that meant was that, of course, I had to rehab myself, and I, as you can imagine, had to call on all of the tools that I had. Now, luckily, I was in very good condition. I've always been an athlete. I was a competitive swimmer when I was in my teens and early 20s. I was a natural bodybuilder when I was in my mid-30s, and I've always been someone that's kept themselves in good physical shape. However, so I had these tools, and that physical background. I had the knowledge from being a physio and understanding movement patterns, and all of this did help me, of course. However, the single biggest factor in recovering the way I have done to a point where I now can do pretty much everything that I could do pre-injury was by embracing the practice of calligraphy health, qigong, and mindfulness and meditation, being mindful in my everyday life. The reason for this is because that calmed my nervous system down. When you've had a trauma, you go into a sympathetic response or flight and you need to calm your nervous system down to smooth things out and to allow it to function in the correct way. And this leads me to then start to talk about the science behind what we're actually doing when we are talking about meditation, mindfulness and qigong. So bear with me, guys. I will try and keep this as brief and as basic as possible, and I will give you analogies, but I do need to go into some scientific concepts to explain things. I will try and give analogies and make sure I keep it relevant. So the first thing I want to talk about is the brain. Okay, now the brain works on electrical activity. So there is specialized cells called neurons in the brain that communicate with each other via electrical information. And that creates what's known as brain waves, okay? And you may well be aware of this, if you stick those pads on your head, the EEG, you get this readout of your brain waves, okay? Now, the type of brain waves differ, okay? And they're measured by their speed and their properties. And this is measured in hertz, cycles per second. So when we talk about faster brain waves, we talk about between 12 and 24 hertz. That's beta brainwaves. Now, beta brainwaves have been associated with alert states of being, like task-driven states of being, where, for example, you might be driving your car or trying to solve a mathematical equation. High beta is when you're in a very high alert or highly stressed state, and that is at the higher end of that beta range, and that's known as the flight-flight response. Okay, now this is an adaptive response to be a temporary state of being that will help save your life. For example, if you're running away from a predator, okay, and there's physiological changes that happen in that state, and I will come back to that. But if we move to a different brainwave state, so we just slow the brainwaves down, the next state is between 8 and 12 hertz, and this is alpha. And so this is a relaxed, joyful state when you're doing something you love and you're being present in that moment. For example, if you were rushing to get to work and just thinking of the fastest route and stressing about whether you're going to make it to work on time, you're in beta. But if you were walking that same journey, but you were in the present moment and you were not rushing and you were enjoying every step that you were taking and thinking literally like the expression of remember to smell the roses along the way, yeah? Like taking in the information, smelling the fresh grass, for example, breathing the fresh air. You're in alpha, that's the difference. You're relaxed, you're in a joyful state. So it's often associated with a heart-based emotion, like you may well have gratitude for being alive at that time and the fresh air and the fact that the sun's shining. So heart-based emotions like gratitude, love, joy, empathy, compassion, these are associated with alpha. Then if we move down the scale to the next brainwave state, that's theta, and that's between 4 and 8 hertz. And this is associated with the hypnotic state, or very deeply relaxed state. Think of a yogi going into contemplative meditation for hours on end and really focusing the energy inward. This would be theta, okay? It's also associated with daydreaming. If you were imagining or fantasizing about being on a beautiful beach somewhere, or just a situation that you were memorizing from before, remembering that time when you were in this beautiful location or beautiful state or around people you love, that would be theta. You're daydreaming, you're putting yourself into that situation. Delta is the slowest brainwave, and that's between 0 and 4 hertz, and that's associated with sleep. Now I want to move back to beta, and high beta in particular, the flight-flight response, and talk a little bit more about this and why that it's important to understand. We talked about the fact that high beta is the flight-flight, like you're running away from that predator. Now, your body will adapt in that brainwave state and make changes, physiological changes that are conducive with saving your life. So it will divert the blood flow from your internal organs to your limbs, to your legs and to your arms, so you can run away or you can fight or climb a tree or whatever it is to get away. It also slows and stops your digestive system down because you don't need to digest food when you're running away from that predator. It also slows and stops your immune system because you don't need to fight bacterial infections when you're running away from that predator. So highly adaptive to getting away from the predator, not very useful for long-term health, not very conducive to long-term health, because I think we can all agree that we would want to be able to digest our food and take nutrients from it and fight off infections for long-term health. And a compromise of that is only going to obviously hinder our long-term health. So this is why it's so important, because the brain doesn't know the difference between the stress of running away from a predator or the stresses of everyday go, go, go life. If you've got a CEO who's juggling deadlines and staff, or a parent who's juggling trying to get the kids to school and not be late for work and pay the bills, all of these modern stresses that we have in life keep people in a very high beta state a lot of the time, rather than just temporarily, and that they're living in this chronic stress situation. And this is why chronic stress has been linked with all of the major chronic diseases that are endemic in our society, that are just so prevalent in our society: chronic heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and of course the mental health conditions of anxiety and depression, which are becoming more and more common. So you can see that mindfully moving away from high beta into a more relaxed state of alpha or theta is already going to be beneficial by just taking that time. So that's the mindfulness aspect of it. But I want to go a little bit deeper again. And so we're going to talk a little bit about physics and the atom, okay? Now, this is the energy side of things, yeah? Because biologically, Okay, we've just mentioned how important it is to make sure that we are resonating at a certain frequency, and I can go a little bit further with that as well, actually, just before we move on to the physics of this, that there is such a thing as the Schumann resonance, which is 7.8 hertz. Now that is the resonance of the Earth. Okay, so basically the Earth has a magnetic field around it, an electromagnetic field around it called the magnetosphere. Okay, and this can be measured. It has been measured, as I say, by the person who invented it, Schumann, and hence the Schumann resonance. So he found that this magnetosphere resonates at this 7.83 hertz, which is right on the cusp of alpha and theta. So you're moving away from a brainwave state, that chronic stressed flight state, and you're moving towards this joyful state at the cusp of alpha and theta by meditation and certain techniques. Okay, and you're now more in resonance with this Schumann resonance. Why is that important? Okay, well, if you take this resonance away from bees, they don't return to their hives. If you take this resonance away from birds, they can't migrate. So biological life has been shown to function based on its connection with this resonance. And this is true of humans as well. Human studies where they've put people into bunkers, okay, and that's taken them away from this resonance. Their cognition goes down, their mood reduces. And then when they pump this resonance back into the room, their cognition improves, their mental clarity, and their mood enhances again. So it's fundamentally important for biological life. Okay, so when we're talking about the biology side of things, you can see clearly that it's all science. There shouldn't be any mystery there of why that works. But coming back, as I said, to the energetic component, the physics of it. Okay, and as I say, I'll try not to go too deep of this, but I just want to explain a little bit. So every biological entity on Earth is made up of atoms. Now, atoms are almost entirely an energetic phenomenon. Okay, and I'll explain. So the nucleus of the atom is where the material is in the center, and it's a relatively small area compared to the size of the atom. It's a densely packed area of protons and neutrons, okay, and that's the material side of the atom. Then you have this relatively huge, vast, seemingly empty space with a cloud of electrons around it. And just to put it into scale, if the nucleus was the size of a pea, the empty space, or the seemingly empty space, would be the size of a baseball stadium. Now, I say seemingly empty space because modern physics has now shown that that empty space, or what they believed in the past to be empty space, is not in fact empty. It's densely packed with energy. And this is true of the empty space in the atom and empty space in the vacuum of space, like in the cosmos. So space is actually full of energy, because when they go down into the subatomic level, which they've done with, there's these places around the world, in Switzerland, the CERN Hydro Collider, where they bash atoms into each other at high speeds, and then they see all the subatomic particles and see how things are behaving. And they advance their understanding of what's going on in empty space. And as I say, what they see is that they've got this fluctuation, this vibration, as they go right down the scale to the very smallest scale described, which is called the Planck scale by Max Planck, who discovered it. That this scale is so tiny that 1 grain of sand, if that represented a Planck, the atom that we talked about would be 40 trillion kilometers wide. So we're talking absolutely tiny. But then you can imagine, therefore, that then there's however many millions and billions and trillions of units of Planck just within one single atom. And then you have 50 trillion cells in the body made up of 100 trillion atoms in each cell. So we can say that the atom is densely packed with energy, and therefore there's that many atoms in each cell, and then that many cells in our body. It isn't that hard to understand why us as a biological entity has an electromagnetic biofield around us generated by the atoms that we're made of. So that's the relevance. That's why I wanted to talk about that, so that every living entity has this biofield. The Earth has a biofield. The magnetosphere is its biofield, a magnetic, electrical magnetic representation of the atoms that it's made up of, as our biofield is an electromagnetic representation of the atoms that we're made up of, as plants are, and so on. So you can see that it's really important to understand that aspect of things. Now, what's the relevance to health? Okay, so each cell in our body, okay, has a cell membrane, and that cell membrane is sensitive to its chemical environment and to its energetic environment. So the chemical environment would be an example if a cell is bathed in blood, for example, and that blood is really healthy blood because you've been breathing fresh air up in the clear mountains, drinking crisp spring water and eating fresh fruit and veg and so on, so that your chemistry is very, very good, like very, very optimal. And that is going to signal that cell membrane positive information, which it then sends down into the nucleus, which then switches on certain genes for health that are conducive for health, because the DNA and the genes are contained in the nucleus, but they get their signal from the cell membrane. So that's great, but what happens if the chemical signal is good, but the energetic signal is not good, is a negative signal? Well, it's been shown that the cell membrane is 10 times more sensitive to its energetic environment than its chemical environment. So if you have a discoherent energy signature going into that cell, it will override the positive of the chemical, okay? And this is called the nocebo effect, right? The slightly less known variation of the placebo effect. Now, a nocebo effect is where you actually make yourself unwell, okay, through the energetic signatures that you put into your body. So because of the fact that you can generate different electromagnetic signals and signatures through your emotions, like we were saying, that it's linked to these emotions, that if you are very stressed and living in fear, which is very relevant, you know, in today's times, you can actually signal to your cell messages that will actually be not conducive to long-term health and make you unwell, okay, even if your chemical environment is good. But the flip side is true, okay, that if your chemical environment is not optimal, maybe you haven't been eating ideal foods, or, you know, polluted water, or breathing polluted air, which again, in modern societies, you know, there is a lot of these pollutants around, we can override that by having these positive energetic signatures, which are generated, okay, by our positive emotions, as we're saying, these heart-based emotions, which will then have these positive energetic signatures signal down into the cell positive information, and therefore help your long-term health. It's the difference between coherent energy signatures and discoherent energy signatures, okay? So what do I mean by coherence, okay? Coherence is, for example, if you had two pebbles and you dropped them at the exact same time into a pool of water, they weighed the same, they were smooth, they landed exactly the same, they would make the same kind of ripples, synchronized, and that would be a coherent wave pattern, coherence. If you had one large stone and a small pebble, and you dropped them at different heights, they were traveling at different speeds, hit the water at different times, you're going to get a discoherence because the wave pattern is going to be not in sync. And so that's the difference. Now, when you're in alpha and theta, it's been shown, it's measured by something called a magnetometer, been shown to have this coherent, larger energy field, which then can permeate down at the cellular level, compared to when you're in a fear-based emotion, that you have this discoherent energy field, which again permeates down. So your energy field influences you at a cellular level because your cell membrane is 10 times more sensitive to that than its chemical. So let's make sure, therefore, that our energetic signature is carrying positive, coherent information. How do we do that? We mindfully move into that alpha, theta, joy state on the cusp of alpha and theta, in resonance with the earth. And that is why mindfulness and meditation and qigong, which cultivates that practice of doing that, connecting with earth's energy, yin energy, and then connecting with your dantian, which is how you connect with earth's energy, getting away from your brain, your monkey mind, and moving down into your dantian, which allows that connection. Okay, and then once you've charged your dantian up passing that positive information through every cell in your body is how you actually enhance your long-term health at a cellular level. So I know that there was quite a lot of information there, guys, but hopefully you can see how that is why there is this fundamental importance for being mindful and practicing meditation, or a technique that allows you to cultivate these positive energy signatures. So hopefully that was useful, guys. As far as further information, I work for myself. The company that I work for is called MF Health and Fitness, or on Instagram it's Mikey F Health and Fitness. You can message me at mfhealthandfitness@yahoo.com, or you can text me at 0431 149 211. Now, I'm also collaborating with some wonderful guys that share my vision and have this absolute idea of wellness and spreading these techniques out to the community, involving sound healing, involving breath work, meditation, and of course encompassing qigong and calligraphy. And so these wonderful individuals are called I Am Human. Okay, so at I Am Human on Instagram, and you can then actually find more information about qigong, calligraphy that I practice, and just mindfulness meditation, and bringing in ancient techniques of sound healing that also raise and change that vibrational frequency of our energy signature. It's all about that. It's about cultivating that through these different techniques. So again, hopefully you found value in this video, guys. Hopefully you found it interesting, and I didn't bore you too much with too much science, but it was just to make you understand. And if you do want to find out more, I would love for you to be able to join me. I'm going to be running one-to-one sessions and group sessions, and I'm very passionate, as I say, about getting this message out there to help as many people help themselves as possible. So thanks, guys. See you next time.